talk about how President Trump and Elon Musk are holding up tens of billions of dollars in energy investments nationwide. They're putting jobs at risk and they are raising the energy costs for our families. We're now well into the fourth week of President Trump's illegal and deeply harmful funding freeze. Trump is still blocking funding that we secured in the bipartisan infrastructure law and in the Inflation Reduction Act, among a lot else, from going out the doors. It is, of course, illegal for a president to unilaterally decide to block funding. And as I have said many times, presidents don't just get to pick and choose what laws they feel like following. But Trump is blocking funding, and it's not merely illegal. It is also devastating for communities like the ones I represent who are counting on these resources. They've hired folks, they're relying on this funding to, for example, lower their monthly energy bill, and who in many cases have already inked contracts. Today, we're talking about the energy investments Trump is blocking, and I want to say from the outset, this is just one slice of the vast pot of funding he's holding up. Trump's freeze is holding up funding for rebuilding roads and bridges, new clean school buses, wildfire prevention efforts, assistance for our farmers, replacing old water pipes, and investments in our national security and more. But today, I do want to zero in on what is going on at the Department of Energy, because make no mistake, in choking off tens of billions of dollars in energy investments, Trump is threatening to kill thousands of good-paying American jobs and raise energy costs for households across the country. When Congress passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we made historic investments to, among a whole lot else, creating good-paying clean energy jobs, spurring innovation, strengthening American manufacturing, and lowering energy costs for families. We provided families funding to upgrade their homes and save big on their energy bills. We delivered resources to build new battery manufacturing plants, construct cutting-edge hydrogen hubs, boost our nuclear power capabilities, and increase domestic production of critical minerals that we absolutely need. As you can imagine, a lot of good new jobs have been created in the process, and we're really just beginning to feel the full effects. 250,000 clean energy jobs have been created since we passed the IRA and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. In Washington State, the new Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub alone is set to create 10,000 jobs. The Department of Energy's Loan Program Office awards alone will support about 50,000 good jobs across the country. But Trump is putting these domestic jobs at risk, which, by the way, plays right into the hands of our competitors like China. And he is simultaneously threatening to rip up programs we've created that lower people's energy costs. Right now, Trump is putting funding for the home energy rebates program in serious jeopardy. We're talking about funding for families to make upgrades that help them save on their monthly energy bill. Funding for people to buy energy efficient appliances and to retrofit their home so that cold air stays out in the winter and hot air stays so cold air stays out in the winter and hot air stays out in the summer. Those programs aren't just important to tackling the climate crisis, they are saving our families money. They provide households up to $14,000 in rebates to make upgrades and lower their energy bills, and they are saving American households up to $1 billion every single year. The Weatherization Assistance Program, for example, saves households $372 on average each year. But again, Trump has now put that on the chopping block. There is no need to dance around it. The guy who swore up and down on the campaign trail that he would lower people's energy costs is now working to raise them. And an administration that says it wants to, quote, restore energy dominance is now working to kill domestic energy projects and the thousands of American jobs that's creating. This funding freeze, which may very well not be a freeze, but a permanent rollback, is bad for our families and it is bad for our workers. It's also bad for American business, who have inked contracts to create these new battery plants, produce sustainable aviation fuel, lay down the new transmission lines, construct new energy plants, and more, and who are now left wondering whether the federal government is going to honor its commitments. That uncertainty alone risks jobs and investments and will hurt local economies everywhere. It was recently reported, for example, that Trump and Musk are looking at canceling even finalized loans provided by the Energy Department's Loan Program Office. That, of course, puts jobs at risk. It puts workers' livelihoods and businesses' bottom lines in jeopardy. But what we are seeing is also a situation rife with potential conflicts of interest and corruption, which is another huge part of the story when it comes to Trump and Musk blocking this funding. I'll give you an example. Back in 2010, when Tesla wasn't doing too hot, Elon Musk secured a $500 million loan from the Department of Energy. That loan boosted the company and Elon Musk and helped them become what they are today. Fast forward to now. Elon Musk is raiding agencies, cutting off funding, canceling contracts, and the Energy Department is apparently looking to cancel loans it's made to its electric vehicle competitors. The obvious question is Elon Musk going to cut off loans that are helping Tesla's competitors create jobs and build their businesses right here in America? So there is a lot at stake. And what is painfully clear is that Trump's illegal funding freeze is causing chaos and confusion. It is putting these jobs and projects at risk, and it will take money out of families' pockets. This has got to end. The court decisions we've gotten so far have affirmed what we have known all along. Trump does not have the power to steal approved funding from the American people. But the relief or the orders should provide is now only temporary, and in many cases, the funding is still frozen. Now, DOE may say they've just developed a new process for thoroughly reviewing all programs and payments somehow, but make no mistake, this process is meant to have the same effect. It is a freeze by a different name, and the funds remain frozen. What needs to happen is Donald Trump and Elon Musk must end the freeze and revoke those orders to choke off those investments. As I've said before, if Donald Trump wants to roll back programs that are lowering people's energy bills, he can come to Congress and win the votes he needs to do that. If Donald Trump wants to gut funding that is creating good paying energy jobs all over our country, he can come to Congress and win the votes he needs to do that. So that's why I'm here today, to sound the alarm and protect critical programs American families rely on and support. You don't just get to rip up contracts and block funding owed to the American people. So with that, let me turn it over to David Turk, who I'm really glad to have us join us and talk about what is happening with this freeze.
Well, let me start, Senator, and the Vice Chair of our Appropriations Committee, Senate Appropriations Committee, with a huge, huge thanks for your phenomenal leadership. Your phenomenal leadership, not only now in terms of raising these issues and making sure everyone, all our fellow Americans, are very much informed about what's going on and what the risks are, but I want to thank you for your leadership in giving us the range of tools in the tool belt, right? The Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, your efforts year in and year out on the Appropriations Committee. And I think it's useful to just take a step back and realize the progress and the momentum and the trajectory that we were on, thanks to the senator's leadership and her colleagues in the Senate and the House, and of course, President Biden and Vice President Harris as well. As of 3.5 weeks ago, we were on a trajectory to have 900 plus new and expanded clean energy manufacturing facilities literally all across the country. I had a chance as Deputy Secretary to visit many of those facilities, game changers in community after community after community across the country, not just for the next several years if we're successful, but for literally decades and decades, competitive manufacturing facilities. Clean energy job growth last year was growing twice as fast as job growth in the broader economy. So these investments that the senator has made, that Congress has made, are having the job impact that we should all want. We should all want that kind of job growth, twice as fast in the clean energy sector as the broader economy more generally. We were on track as of 3.5 weeks ago to have 2,100% more lithium production by 2030 in our country than if we hadn't had this kind of historic investment going forward. I don't know who is against having diversification of supply chains and lithium production. And we're competing. We are competing for the first time, I would say, quite successfully. We've got work to do. We've got to keep at it, competing with China and others around the world, something that we have not been doing successfully for many, many years. So that's the state of the affairs 3.5 weeks ago. Let me start in terms of the impacts of looking forward a little bit. I want to say very clearly, as someone who's visited a lot of these communities, there's been various analysis of where all this investment is taking place all across the country. By some estimates, 80% of this clean energy investment is taking place in red states and red districts all across our country. I think it would be political malpractice not to maintain, not to strengthen this kind of investment in communities across technologies and across our communities going forward. But the point I really want to underscore, and it's a point the senator made, is chaos and confusion and uncertainty is not our friend. If you talk to any investor, if you talk to any CEO, the last thing they need, the last thing they want is chaos, confusion, uncertainty about what should be no-brainers. If the government makes a commitment, if we get to conditional commitment with a loan program recipient, that's the government's credibility. That's the American people's credibility on the line to follow through and make sure that we are providing that certainty for investment. We are providing that certainty to communities going forward. So that uncertainty, that chaos in the near term, and hopefully it is just the near term, has a cost. It has a real cost going forward. And heaven forbid that it costs some of these projects all across our country to fold and to not go forward. Bad for our competitiveness, bad for that community, bad for that job growth going forward. I also want to underscore, and more than happy to get into any level of detail here and to go offline with any reporters who'd like to talk more in depth on the affordability piece. It's in all of our interests to make energy as affordable as it possibly can be in our country for consumers, for companies, for our competitiveness going forward. There's been a number of estimates now made, and happy to again to get into details on this, about what it's going to cost consumers, what it's going to cost Americans going forward if this historic legislation, if these historic tools in the tool belt go away. One estimate said that if you just rescind one single tax credit, now it's an important one, it's the tech neutral tax credit for those who follow that. If you get rid of that, that is 10% more costs by consumers all across the country, average consumers all across the country, that they're going to have to pay just with one tax provision being rescinded. Another estimate said that the average American consumer is going to pay almost $500 more per year if these kinds of programs, the tax incentives, the grants, the loan programs don't go forward. And I think that's a conservative estimate. I think it's actually going to be larger than that going forward. So if the American people wanted affordability, the way to get affordability is to focus on a broad range of technologies, to focus on these tools that are working all across our country, and to not throw chaos and confusion, let alone blocking these programs going forward. So I'll leave it there in the interest of time, but happy to, again, answer any and all questions.
Thank you. We'll turn it over to Joe.
Thank you so much, Senator Murray, and appreciate the opportunity to weigh in as the Director of Commerce here in Washington State for the Ferguson administration. Obviously, this chaos is not good for us in Washington State. You'll hear a lot of my remarks mirror those that you and Dave have already said as well, but thousands of low-income families will be impacted. You will see sky-high heating bills and drafty homes with no relief in sight because some of these funds are frozen right now. The hardest hit communities in Washington State will be some of the smaller towns, the rural communities that have been left in the dark because of these inactions that we're seeing at the federal level. You know, right now we're seeing wildfires certainly be an impact in California, and it has historically been an impact in Washington State. Relief around preventing wildfires will certainly be at risk as well. You know, the clean energy industry, we are very thankful for the partnership at the federal level historically, especially given the work that we've done in Washington State on clean energy with the Climate Commitment Act. The Climate Commitment Act, along with the IRA and the IIJA, has unleashed tremendous potential for clean energy jobs in Washington state. All of that is now at risk. All of that is under threat, and we're seeing illegal freezes happening in federal funds today. In fact, I had a report from my team on updates on what that looks like. There are over $450 million in federal energy funds currently stalled in Washington state. And that doesn't include, over $1.23 billion of IIJA and IRA funds that are just at risk because of federal inaction. So our exposure is pretty tremendous in Washington state, and that's because we've invested so much to ensure that our communities have a green future where people can have clean water and clean air. There will be higher energy costs for families and businesses. We will likely lose jobs in Washington state, especially in our clean energy sector. But to be clear, the clean energy sector is why businesses come to Washington state, is because they have energy to conduct their business. So there will be impacts. Our energy infrastructure, just like across the United States, could use modernization. That will be impacted. And then our weatherization as well for homes. So communities across Washington state will be impacted by these actions. And largely the communities hurt the most will be low-income families, rural communities, small businesses, those who are already struggling, and those who are going to suffer even more under these directives as well. Washington state cannot afford to wait while Trump plays politics with our future. And these funds were approved by you, Senator Murray, by Congress, and signed into law. And blocking them harms Washington families and businesses. I can go on around the specific nuances around how we implement these in commerce in Washington state. We are certainly reviewing our portfolio around risk associated with this work as well. But I will say, spending 3.5 weeks on these issues is very different than the previous administration, where we could have spent 3.5 weeks deploying these resources in our communities. Uncertainty, like Dave said, is not going to help us out with the market. Making sure that our communities feel supported and heard is certainly being tested at this moment as well. So I thank you, Senator Murray, for your work, for your advocacy, for your continued support in this space. We in Washington state want to be a leader in these spaces, and what's happening now obviously is not going to help us out. So thank you so much.
Great. And with that, we've got time for a few questions from press if you have a question, and just please raise your hand and we will call on folks as we see them. Yes, Rachel with the Hill, you're up first.
Hi, thank you guys for doing this call and taking my question. I actually wanted to ask Joe, can you tell us more? Is the state, are funds frozen from the federal government to the state? Are there any programs specifically that you guys are not receiving funding for that you otherwise would have? And can you tell us more about, which specific programs you're not receiving funding for, if any?
Yeah, and you can probably tell I check on a regular basis. There are 2 programs right now at Commerce specifically, so I can't speak to the other agencies, but I know that there are impacts there as well. Solar for All and also our decarbonization grants from the feds are both frozen at this moment. And then there's about $1.2 billion of funds where they're not subject to the executive order, but inaction has caused some uncertainty as well with those resources.
Can you elaborate on that? Some of that inaction and the uncertainty?
Yeah, so obviously we have to partner with our federal agencies to structure grant programs before we can deploy them. That process is not currently happening. So we are reviewing our portfolio for things that are still open, not necessarily impacted by the executive order specifically, but because we're not seeing the engagement that we would normally expect from the feds, they are not being deployed.
Right. Next, we'll go to Jake with Washington State Standard.
Thanks. This is also for Joe. You mentioned the Solar for All funding. Had that been reopened and then frozen again? And then do you have a dollar figure for the decarbonization grants? And can you explain a bit more about what that work looks like?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So the Solar for All was suspended, technically, was open, and then as of this morning was suspended again. So that certainly is still in flux. The decarbonization grant is a federal program in partnership with the state to help local jurisdictions figure out a decarbonization strategy for their local communities as well. That one is about $3 million that we give out to local jurisdictions to help them figure out their decarbonization strategies. That is a new one that is now frozen as of this morning.
All
Thanks.
right. And we will now go to Marianne with Inside Climate News.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Senator, for doing this. I wondered if you could respond to this kind of shift in rationale we're seeing from the Trump administration. They're saying that they are holding back some of these funds because of malfeasance by the Biden administration in handing out the grants. I know you're talking about energy, but Lee Zeldin put out a press release this morning calling for an inspector general investigation of the grants that EPA awarded in the last few weeks. And, the courts have kind of said that, well, if you have a reason for breaking these contracts or the courts, certainly in the FEMA case in New York, allowed the Trump administration to claw that money back. Are you concerned about that?
Look, that's why we have attorney generals. Their job within the agency is to make sure that contracts are being awarded according to law and to protect the consumers, to make sure that that money is allocated correctly and spent correctly. And this Trump administration fired a bunch of them. So they took out that watchdog from the agency and then are cherry picking projects. They say, well, this might be a problem. That is not how you do this. And again, that is contributing to the chaos and to the inability for businesses to invest because they don't know what Trump's going to randomly pick. I talked a little bit about when I started about Elon Musk picking and choosing. Is that who decides? Or is it a nonpartisan attorney or agency person who is in charge of making sure that they got rid of those people and now they're letting random people do this? I have no confidence that they aren't doing this for political reasons or personal reasons or whatever. The American public has a right to know their taxpayer dollars are being protected, not being randomly picked and chosen by Elon Musk.
Thanks so much.
Great. We've got time for just a couple more. We'll turn to John with KUOW.
Yeah, thank you very much. For Joe, of the 450 million that you mentioned in frozen grants, how does that compare to any that have been unfrozen and are flowing again, or maybe were never frozen? How big is this compared to the total landscape of this clean energy funding for the state?
Yeah, just to clarify, the 450 is direct impacts associated with the EO itself as well. So those have been in flux for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm getting updates on a daily basis around what is or is not impacted. So those are at risk. And then there's also the 1.23 billion of the IIJA and the IRA funding that we've received as a state that we're unclear in terms of what the next steps look like, given the posture of the federal government.
Great. And can you provide a list of those frozen funds?
I can follow up afterwards if you want as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
All right, and we'll go to Jeff with NPR.
Hi, for Senator Murray, I understand you're raising the alarm here, but are there things that you can actually do, or is raising the alarm it?
Well, absolutely, we're raising the alarm because we saw a few weeks ago when the public was outspoken about you can't do this, they reversed the freeze. So we are raising the alarm for that reason because public outcry is what can change this at this moment in time. We're also asking people to give us their stories, for Joe to let us know what he's hearing. Unlike any other administration I've ever worked with, Republican or Democrat, as a member of the Senate, I could call that agency and say, give me a list of what you're doing. It may take them a few weeks, but we get it. We are not even getting any communication whatsoever from any of these agencies. So for our ability to do oversight, we are extremely limited to what the public is telling us. I will tell you, that cannot go on. Congress has the authority of oversight, and we have the appropriations that is law that they have to meet. So they are raising the stakes on this to an incredible level, and it's up to our Republican counterparts to raise the alarm as well, because it doesn't just impact this month, this week, or this year. These kinds of actions could impact us for a very long time.
Jeff, if I could add to what the senator just said, I am hearing from a lot of companies in particular companies who are in the loan program process or otherwise having grant money who are very, very concerned. Now, many of those are very concerned back channel conversations at this point, trying to get clarity, trying to get some transparency, which has been incredibly, incredibly challenging for anybody to get along those lines. I think those folks are going to be more and more vocal because of what's at stake. These are companies' futures at stake. These are low-income folks' futures at stake. The real-world consequences here are just enormous. And as the senator was saying to the earlier question, if there's something that's not being done right, everybody's interest is to find that through the inspector generals, through the normal processes. I feel incredibly proud of the phenomenal civil servant talent that we put, including to make sure that we were doing this the right way, that American people would want us to be doing these grants, these loans going forward. And if there's something that needs to be stopped, stop it, but don't stop everything. And just to capture the one or two things that aren't going the way we need to do it. There are processes, there are procedures. Let's be smart about this.
Great. And next we'll go to Ben with E&E News.
Hi, I just wanted to, this is up for all three of you, I guess. How would you describe the impact on U.S. climate policy of the moves that this administration has made in its first couple weeks here?
Well, I can say there's a fear factor going on that if you even say the words that you won't be able to get the information. Anybody who looks around at the weather that's going on now, look what just happened in California, look at the forest fires across our state and others, look at, a lot of the impacts here. Why would anybody say we're going to stop all of these new clean energy projects, which is the solution for all of us? Just makes no sense to me.
Hey, Ben, just to answer your question with some numbers, when the Biden-Harris administration came into office, our country was on a trajectory to reduce our emissions from 2005 to 2030 about 20%. 20% reduction for a whole number of reasons, including innovation, some policy that the senator was able to get done even before the last 4 years. But with all those historic investments, the IRA, the bill, we went from a 20% reduction trajectory to a 40% reduction trajectory. That is huge. Now, that's not as much as we need to do. We need to do even more than that because we are seeing the consequences of climate change all across our country and all across our world. Going from 20% to 40% is not inevitable that we stay at 40%. There's a lot at risk here. And frankly, when you get competition with China, you get jobs, you get revitalized manufacturing, you get all of these kinds of things. Again, this is the biggest no-brainer to keep winning, right? If we want to win, this is the pathway to win on all these fronts. And that's what's at risk here.
Yeah, and I'll say at the very least, at a subnational level, I was at COP29 in Baku over this past summer, and certainly that was already a consideration that potentially could happen. And I'll just highlight in 2018, Elon Musk said climate change is the biggest threat that humanity faces in this century. So certainly even he understood the implications of this effort as well. And obviously maybe his position has evolved since then, but this is still very much a threat to humanity.
Great. And unless there are any last questions here, we will wrap the call, but I'll give it just a moment here. Ryan, looks like you've got John. Do you have one last question for us?
I do. Thank you. Joe, Washington is in an unusual, if not unique, position of having its own major source of funding with the Climate Commitment Act, carbon pollution fees. How much is that insulating Washington State from the impacts of these federal cuts?
Yes, it's a double-edged sword. So because of the Climate Commitment Act, we were very fortunate to be able to partner with our federal government to be able to get matching dollars for Washington State, tens of billions of dollars for Washington State because of the Climate Commitment Act. So if anything, yes, we are able to do things that other jurisdictions may not be able to do. But the downside is that we had a partner in doing this and we had resources to do this that we no longer have, in the sense that obviously the administration is not the same in terms of its thought process on climate change and the resources we are worried that are at risk. The numbers that I quoted you were just for commerce. That's not for all of Washington State. Small businesses, farmers, other people as well will be impacted. So we can move forward on some of these efforts, but it will not be at the same pace and the same aggressiveness as we were doing before.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to everybody for participating with us, and we will keep doing the best job we can to inform you of the real live impacts that are coming at us very rapidly in these days. So thank you.